The gravity on Kor-Seleth Station was 1.14 standard, which meant Dr. Nadia Ferris had been carrying an extra 11 kilograms of herself since docking. It showed in her stride the slightly too deliberate placement of each foot, the way she leaned into corners. After 3 days, her calves had adjusted. Her spine had not. She was crossing the arbitration concourse when the Veth delegation walked into her. Not metaphorically. The lead delegate, 7 feet of banded exoskeleton, and compound eye clusters, a species that communicated in subsonic frequencies and considered lateral movement an act of aggression, walked into her with the particular confidence of something that had never been required to watch where it was going. Ferris went down. Her specimen case skidded 6 meters across the polished transit floor and stopped at the feet of the Galactic Accord's senior mediator, a Thalessi named Coordinator Vesh-Orim, who had the approximate coloring of old bone and the approximate patience of a geological formation. "The human has fallen," Vesh-Orim observed. His translation node rendered it in perfectly inflected Terran standard. The flatness was not unkindness. It was just how Thalessi spoke. Ferris was already up. She catalogued: left knee, bruised, mobile, right palm, abraded, no structural damage. Specimen case. Intact, she could hear the containment seals cycling normally from across the concourse. She crossed to it, picked it up, dusted it, and came back. The Veth delegate had not moved. It was watching her with 7 of its 12 eye clusters, which in Veth body language meant something between curious and alarmed. "I require the identity of this organism," it transmitted through its own translation node. The sound came out as a bass vibration she felt more in her sternum than her ears. It fell in a public transit lane and then immediately resumed forward motion. "This is inconsistent with injury protocols." "That's because I'm not injured," Ferris said. "You fell." I got up. "These are sequential states. The second does not erase the first." Ferris looked at the delegate. It was approximately the size and threat profile of a small armored vehicle. She looked at her palm. It was bleeding slightly. She pressed it against her thigh and it stopped being relevant. "I'm Dr. Nadia Ferris," she said. "Xenobiological Mediation Corps, Earth Consulate. I'm here for the arbitration." The Veth was quiet for a moment, which in its species meant it was running her name against a database. Then, "You are the human the Accord sent to mediate the Keth and Veth territorial dispute." "Correct." "You have no weapons." "Correct." "You have no security complement." "Also correct." 7 eye clusters became 10. "Then what are you?" It was not phrased as a question. Ferris filed that away. The Veth didn't ask. They asserted a gap in their understanding and waited for the gap to be filled. Useful, probably. Later. "I'm a doctor," she said. "Specifically, a specialist in interspecies physiological trauma and its behavioral correlates. I study the ways that physical suffering changes the way species make decisions." Another pause. The translation node hummed. "That is not a weapon." Ferris smiled. It was a small smile. The kind you develop when you've spent 6 years explaining yourself to people who have never encountered the concept of leverage that doesn't involve mass or velocity. "No," she agreed. "It's not." Vesh-Orim had drifted close enough to overhear. The Thalessi coordinator said nothing. He had been coordinating interspecies arbitrations for 40 years, and he had learned, somewhere around year 12, that the moments worth watching were the ones where nothing appeared to be happening. This appeared to be one of those moments. Ferris retrieved her case, checked the seals one more time, and followed the escorting drone toward the arbitration chambers. The Veth delegate watched her go. It transmitted a brief burst query to its delegation ship, a question about human physiology, specifically about the relationship between injury, pain response, and resumed locomotion. The response from its ship's database was inconclusive. The Veth found this unusual. Their database was rarely inconclusive. The briefing room smelled like recycled air and something faintly organic that Ferris had learned to stop trying to identify. She'd been in 60 stations like this one. They all smelled like the universe's collective attempt to maintain a breathable atmosphere in a metal tube, which was to say, functional and not pleasant. Vesh Oram sat across from her. Two of his staff flanked him. Thalessi with the same old bone coloring, same geological patience. On the wall screen, a map of the disputed corridor between Keth Prime and Veth Meridian pulsed in contested territory red. The Keth have held this corridor for 2 centuries, Vesh Oram said. The Veth claim prior survey rights, predating Keth settlement, by 11 years. Both claims are documented. Both are legally cognizable. 4 previous mediators have failed to produce agreement. What happened to the 4 previous mediators? Ferris asked. 3 resigned. 1 requested reassignment after what she described as irreconcilable methodological differences with the process. And before her? She did not resign, Vesh Oram said. She simply stopped attending sessions. Ferris looked at the map. The corridor was a resource lane, rare element transit, gravitational survey value, the usual. Neither side needed it badly enough to go to war. Both sides needed it enough that yielding felt like losing. She had seen this shape of problem before. It was the shape of almost every problem. Who attends for the Keth? She asked. Their first voice. She is called Tren Keth Alo. She has attended all 4 previous mediations. She is Vesh Oram, paused in the way that Thalessi paused when they were selecting among multiple accurate descriptions. Patient. And the Veth? The delegate you met in the concourse. Senior Assessor Veth Kolmarin. He has attended the last 2 mediations. Ferris nodded. She opened her specimen case on the table. Inside, arrayed in foam-padded compartments, 2 data slates, a portable bioscan relay, a collection of small transparent sample containers, 3 syringes with different colored caps, and a worn paper notebook with a rubber band around it. Vesh Oram looked at the case. I was told you would be bringing equipment, he said. I did. He looked at the case again. This is the equipment. Yes. The previous mediators brought legal staff. Computational dispute modeling arrays. One brought a certified coercive arbitration AI. How'd that work out? Vesh Oram was quiet for a moment. The Veth dismantled it on the 3rd day. Physically. They found its probability weighting models ideologically offensive. Right, Ferris said. She picked up the notebook and uncapped a pen. Tell me about the Keth. Specifically, what do they find painful? The Thalessi coordinator looked at her for a long moment. 40 years of interspecies arbitration. He had seen many approaches. That, he said slowly, is not a question any of the previous mediators asked. I know, Ferris said. The Keth were silicon-based, which was less exotic than it sounded and more complicated in practice. Their nervous system processed sensation through a distributed lattice, rather than a centralized pathway, which meant they didn't experience pain the way carbon-based species did, no single locus, no spike and response. Instead, the Keth experience of physical distress was cumulative, distributed, and slow. It built over days, sometimes weeks, before a Keth individual registered that something was wrong. Ferris had written her doctoral thesis on this. What it meant, in practical terms, the Keth were exceptional negotiators because they didn't feel the pressure of time the way most species did. A Keth could sit in an uncomfortable room for a month before her body told her it was uncomfortable. 4 previous mediators had tried to leverage urgency against them and had failed because urgency required a nervous system that felt the passage of time as accumulating discomfort, and Keth nervous systems didn't work that way. The Veth were something different. Veth Kolmarin arrived at the first joint session 12 minutes early, which Ferris logged without comment. She had been in the room for 40 minutes, which was not punctuality, it was reconnaissance. She had rearranged 3 of the chairs, The seating configuration has been altered, Veth Kor-Seleth observed as he entered. He had 3 members of his delegation with him. The original configuration put your delegation with ambient light from the left side panels, Ferris said. Veth compound eye clusters are pressure-sensitive to photon flux variance. The original setup would have given you mild headaches by the second hour. I moved you to the center row. There. All 12 eye clusters were on her. How do you know our photoreceptor physiology? I read the Accord's xenobiological survey on Veth sensory systems, Ferris said. It's about 900 pages. The relevant section is 43. Silence. Then, you read 900 pages of xenobiology for a trade corridor arbitration. I read 900 pages of xenobiology because I was curious, Ferris said. The arbitration is secondary. The Keth delegation arrived 2 minutes later. First voice Tren Keth was smaller than Ferris had expected. Silicon-based species ran larger on average, but Tren was approximately human-sized, her crystalline outer lattice refracting the room's lighting into small prismatic patterns across the floor. She took her seat without examining it. She looked at Ferris for exactly the amount of time required to calibrate a visual memory, then looked at the disputed corridor map on the wall screen. We are prepared to restate our position, Tren said. I know your position, Ferris said. I read the previous 4 mediation transcripts. Both of you. I'd rather skip the restatement and talk about what makes this hard. Another silence. This one had a different texture. It was the silence of 2 parties who had expected a particular opening and found a different one where it should have been. What makes this hard, Veth Kor-Seleth said, is that the Keth occupy a corridor to which the Veth have prior survey claim. That's what the dispute is, Ferris said. I asked what makes it hard. Those are different things. Tren Keth lattice caught the light in a new pattern. Ferris had read enough Keth physiological literature to know that was the equivalent of a raised eyebrow. The previous mediators were more interested in the legal framework, Tren said. The legal framework has been argued 4 times, Ferris said. It hasn't produced an agreement. That suggests the legal framework isn't the problem. She paused. What do you both actually need from this corridor? Resource transit rights, Veth Kor-Seleth said immediately. Long-term settlement security, Tren said, equally quickly. Ferris wrote both answers in her notebook. She wrote them on the same line. Then, she held up the notebook so they could both see. These aren't the same need, she said. They're not even the same category of need. You've been arguing about ownership of a thing. When one of you needs the thing's function, and one of you needs to not be afraid. The room was quiet. Vesh Orim, observing from the corner, made a note. In 40 years he had seen many opening sessions. This was the first time he had seen both parties go quiet simultaneously, and neither of them appear to be offended. It was the 3rd hour before things went wrong. Veth Kor-Seleth had been answering a question about survey methodology when his translation node flagged a terminology conflict. A phrase in Ferris's question that mapped differently in Veth diplomatic register than in technical register, implying something that bordered on accusation of falsified records. His eye clusters shifted into a threat configuration that his delegation recognized immediately. 2 of them stood. Ferris stood first. Not in the way a threatened person stands. She stood the way a person stands when they've decided where they need to be. She walked around the table, between the standing delegates, placed herself facing Veth Kor-Seleth from a distance of about 1 meter, and said, "The translation node misrendered my question. I wasn't asking about data integrity. I was asking about sample collection methodology. Those are different questions. I apologize for the phrasing. Veth threat configurations depended on proximity assessment. An entity that moved toward a threatening Veth, instead of away, was a data anomaly. Veth Kor-Seleth's clusters rotated through several processing configurations, while his threat response tried to locate the correct behavioral script for this input. There wasn't one. You approached, he said. I needed you to hear me clearly, Ferris said. Translation nodes are better at short distances. Prey organisms retreat, Veth Kor-Seleth said. It was not an insult. It was a statement of biological taxonomy. Humans are persistence predators, Ferris said. We follow things. It's a reflex. She took a breath. Do you want me to repeat the actual question? Veth Kor-Seleth looked at her for a long moment. His eye clusters cycled back to a neutral configuration. Yes, he said. Repeat the question. She repeated it. He answered it. Tren Kethalo watched all of this from her seat. She did not move for 2 minutes after the exchange ended. When she finally spoke, she directed the comment to the Veth delegate, which was unusual in 4 previous mediation sessions. Keth and Veth representatives had addressed each other approximately 6 times. The human walked toward you, Tren said. Yes, Veth Kor-Seleth said. While you were in a threat configuration. Yes. Tren's lattice refracted the light again. That is interesting, she said, in a tone that suggested interesting meant something more complicated than the word usually carried. Ferris didn't comment on this. She wrote something in her notebook. Neither delegation could see what it was. It was, they're both watching each other watch me. That's the first time they've been watching the same thing. And a ground. 2/3. And a ground. And a ground. On the 4th day, the station's primary water reclamation circuit failed. It was not catastrophic. The backup systems engaged within 90 seconds, and the station's engineering crew, 4 Thalessi and 1 Borathi, began repair procedures according to a protocol that had been written 70 years ago and updated twice since. The problem was that the protocol had been written for a station with a different atmospheric mix, and the current mix meant that the repair access hatch on sublevel 3 was in a compartment that neither Thalessi nor Borathi physiognomy could safely enter. Thalessi respiratory systems couldn't tolerate the coolant residue. Borathi were too large for the access dimensions. Vesh Orem delivered this information to the delegations as a courtesy notification. It was not a request for assistance. The engineering crew was working on a workaround. Ferris asked how long the workaround would take. Vesh Orem said probably 16 hours. Ferris asked what the coolant residue was composed of. Vesh Orem told her. Ferris went to her room, came back with a filtration mask rated for chemical particulate exposure, confirmed the residue composition was within the mask's operational parameters, and told the engineering crew she could enter the compartment. There was a discussion. The engineering crew's position was that a diplomatic guest should not perform maintenance operations. Ferris's position was that 16 hours without functional water reclamation affected 340 station inhabitants across 17 species. And some of them had biological dependencies on water cycling that made 16 hours a medical issue rather than an inconvenience. The engineering crew checked the filtration mask specs. The compartment required a manual relay, reset a physical procedure, taking approximately 20 minutes if you knew what you were doing. They gave Ferris a technical schematic and asked if she could read it. She read it. She asked 2 clarifying questions. Then she put on the mask and went into the compartment. Neither delegation had been told any of this. They were in a break session. Refreshments. Corridor use. Individual preparation. Veth Kor-Seleth had been watching the station's external sensor feed when the maintenance alert triggered, and he tracked it with mild attention until the sensors logged a single bipedal organism entering the repair compartment. He pulled her personnel file. He cross-referenced her credentials. He confirmed that the organism was Ferris. He watched the compartment's internal diagnostic feeds for the next 22 minutes. The relay reset took her longer than the estimate a secondary coupling was corroded, which she hadn't been told about, and the schematic didn't include it because the schematic was from the original station build. She solved it by adapting the manual reset tool into a brace configuration using a length of cable conduit she found in the compartment, which was not a technique the schematic covered. The water reclamation system came back online. The engineering crew logged the repair time as 22 minutes, which was 6 minutes over estimate due to undocumented secondary coupling. They also logged the specific repair method, because they had not seen that cable conduit adaptation before, and it worked better than the standard approach. When Ferris emerged from the compartment, she found Veth Kor-Seleth waiting in the sub-level corridor. He was alone, which was unusual. Veth traveled in minimum 2 configurations, outside formal settings. "You performed the repair," he said. Ferris pulled off the filtration mask and checked the seal for damage. It was fine. She'd want to clean the filters before using it again. "Yes," she said. "It was not your function." "No. There was risk to your health from the coolant residue. Within acceptable parameters for this mask rating," she said. "I checked before I went in." Veth Kor-Seleth processed this for a moment. "Why?" he said. Ferris looked up from the mask. It was a genuine question, the Veth version of it, which meant he wasn't asking about her reasoning. He was asking about the category of motivation. He genuinely did not have a file for this. 16 hours is a long time for the people on this station, she said. "They are not your people." "No," she agreed. "They're people, though." The Veth looked at her for a long time. His eye clusters ran through several configurations she didn't have the physiological dictionary to read. Then he said something to her in Veth's subsonic register, not through the translation node. She felt it in her sternum. The translation node picked it up after a delay and rendered it. "I do not understand what you are." "I know," Ferris said. "That's okay. We have more sessions." She headed back to the upper levels. He watched her go. He stood in the sub-level corridor for another 4 minutes after she was out of sight, running the behavioral data against every reference category he possessed. He kept coming back to the same gap. She had gone into the compartment knowing there was risk, and that the people she was helping were not her responsibility. This was not a strategy. He had been assessing her for strategies since the first session, and he was certain this was not one, which meant it was something else. He did not yet have a word for what it was. When he returned to the Veth delegation quarters, his second asked what had happened on sub-level 3. "The human repaired the water system," Veth Kor-Seleth said. "She is a mediator." "Yes." "Why did she repair the water system?" Veth Kor-Seleth considered. "She said it was because they were people," he said. "Though they were not her people." His second processed this. "That does not parse." "No," Veth Kor-Seleth agreed. "It does not." He filed the data point and went back to his preparation for the next session. He filed it carefully because he had learned in 40 years of interspecies contact that the data points that did not parse were usually the important ones. On the 6th day, someone tried to end the arbitration. The attempt was not violent, which in Ferris's experience made it more dangerous. Violence announced itself. This was quieter. A formal communication from the Veth Meridian governing body, transmitted directly to the Accord's Senior Coordination Office, stating that the current mediation format was unauthorized under the Veth Compact's arbitration standards because the mediating party had engaged in extracurricular station activity that compromised impartiality. The extracurricular activity was the water reclamation repair. The argument was technically cognizable under a clause of the Veth Compact that required mediators to maintain strict procedural neutrality, which the Veth Legal Office was interpreting to include not performing voluntary services for station inhabitants during mediation proceedings. It was a narrow reading. It was also not wrong. Vesh Orim delivered the communication to Ferris at 0630 station time before the morning session. He delivered it in person, which meant he had assessed it as urgent. He stood in the doorway of her quarters while she read it. "The Veth governing body is not the same as the Veth delegation," Ferris said. "No. Veth Kor-Seleth did not initiate this." "Do we know who did?" "The communication comes from the Compact's Legal Coordination Office. It is the kind of communication that requires someone to ask for it. Vesh-Orim paused. The Veth Compact has members who believe this corridor dispute should be settled by different means than mediation. How different? Considerably. Ferris looked at the communication again. The technical violation was real. She'd known it was a possible reading of the neutrality clause when she went into that compartment, and she'd decided the water reclamation was worth it. That was a choice, and choices had costs. She'd arrived at the cost on schedule. What happens if they invalidate my standing? She asked. The mediation suspends. Both delegations return home. The dispute returns to the Accord's backlog. Vesh-Orim's tone was geological. As always. The Accord's backlog currently runs approximately 11 years. And during 11 years, the Veth Compact's more aggressive members will advocate for direct territorial action. The Keth will respond to direct territorial action in ways consistent with their history. He paused. Their history involves considerable loss of life on both sides. Ferris set down the communication. I need the session, she said. This morning. Both delegations. Full formal. The communication can be formally received this afternoon, she said. After the session. Vesh-Orim looked at her. 40 years of arbitration. He had seen mediators confronted with procedural invalidation before. None of them had responded by requesting an accelerated session. You intend to use the morning session, he said, to accomplish something before your standing is removed. I intend to use the morning session to do what I came here to do, Ferris said. Yes. There was a long pause. I'll convene the session, Vesh-Orim said. She was ready when the delegations arrived. Veth Kolmarin came in first and read her immediately. There was something different in her posture. Tren Keth Alo took her seat, and her lattice ran through a refraction cycle that Ferris had learned, over 6 days, was curiosity. I want to do something different today, Ferris said. I want to show you both something. She opened her specimen case. From it, she took a bioscan relay, a small projector node, and 3 of the transparent sample containers. These are tissue samples, she said, with permissions already on file, obtained before this mission. The first is Keth cortical lattice. The second is Veth neural cluster. The third is human prefrontal tissue. She set the projector node on the table. It produced a 3-dimensional representation of each sample in sequence. The distributed lattice of the Keth nervous system, the dense cluster formations of the Veth, the sprawling dendritic complexity of the human. I'm going to show you what each of these looks like under threat response, she said. I'm going to show you what they look like under chronic unresolved conflict. And I'm going to show you something that standard xenobiological surveys don't usually show, because it requires a specific imaging protocol that I happen to specialize in. She ran the imaging sequence. The samples shifted the Keth lattice, showing the slow crystalline stress fractures that appeared under sustained threat. The Veth cluster going dense and hyperconnected in ways that eventually impaired long-range pattern recognition. The human tissue lighting up in cascades that spread from limbic, through prefrontal, and back again in a cycle she had studied for 6 years.